Hi everyone! Today we're going to be making these beautiful crepe paper magnolia flowers. The supplies you're going to need for this are 180 grams crepe paper, text weight metallic cardstock, a glue gun, 18 gauge wire, corsage tape, and you may also need detail scissors or a quilling tool. And I have linked resources for these particular materials I have used below this YouTube video and in the description, so you can check there if you're not sure where to find these exact materials. You can also find the cutting machine measurements I use if you are using a cutting machine in the description below, and the templates are linked below. If you don't have a cutting machine, you can hand cut using the printable PDFs that are included. These Magnolia templates are really beautiful, and these flowers are really pretty, and they make a really wonderful statement, and they look very realistic. So let's go ahead and get started. I've gathered my supplies here, and I've cut out 3 smaller petals, 4 to 5 larger petals. It will vary depending on your preference and how your flower comes together. And then I've also cut out 12 to 14 of the centermost petals that we're going to use for the stamen. I also have corsage tape, and you may need some wire clippers if you want to trim your stem down. And these are my detail scissors, and you may also want a quilling tool, but if you don't have this already on hand, you can just use the detail scissors for what we're going to be using it for in just a minute here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my wire, and I'm going to trim it down a little bit because this is a pretty big wire. I don't need it to be quite as long as it is, so I'm just going to go ahead and trim that down. And this wire is already kind of wrapped with a cloth-like material, so it's not bare wire. And the next thing we're going to want to do is stretch our petals, and you're just wanting to work from the center and just give it a little bit of a stretch, pulling with your thumbs to give it a bit of a cupped look. And do this with all of your petals, all 3 small and all 4 to 5 of your larger ones, and just give them a little stretch in the middle. Don't stretch the outer edges as much because you want those to be what kind of curls, and you want the center to be the area that you're placing that stretch into. So focus just on the center when you're pulling those petals there. Crepe paper is really wonderful for creating realistic looking flowers because of the way we can stretch the paper like that. So moving on to my center petals here, I have some that are slightly smaller. I cut out about 5 slightly smaller ones that we're going to start with first, and then the rest are just a little bit bigger. And what I'm doing here is this is my paper bloom shaping mat, and you don't have to have this. I'm just using it because I happen to have it on hand. If you're interested in it, it is linked below. But you want to kind of poke either with your quilling tool or your detail scissors a hole into the center and then slide them up all the way to the top of your stem. If you're not using wire that's already covered like mine is, you can probably just punch it right through using the wire to punch it through, but if you feel like you need to get a little starter hole, then use either a quilling tool or your detail scissors to kind of punch a starter hole and then slide it up the stem. This is going to be the stamen center for our magnolia flower. So this is just giving me the quilling tool here, or you can use the detail scissors. It's just giving me a little starter hole so that it goes on a little easier for my stem, and then you just slide it all the way up. Now, to get it to stop at the top, you can either add a dot of glue so it doesn't fall off the other end, or you can just bend the tip down a little bit so that your center does not fall off on the other end when you're sliding these up. And you can see here, I'm showing you an example of how I'm doing it with my detail scissors. I'm just punching a little hole with the tip of my detail scissors if you don't have a quilling tool and you find that you need to punch a starter hole to get this to slide up the stem. So just go ahead and slide all of those on, and I ended up with about 15 in the center there, and I started with 4 to 5 of the smaller ones that you'll find in the templates, and then I used the rest as the larger ones that you'll see in the template package. So go ahead and get that center all positioned there up on your stem, and then we'll move on to the petals here in just a second. And once you get finished with your center petals, you can add just a little dot of glue at the very base to keep them from moving around. So while you're adding on your magnolia petals, you won't be trying to like keep the center still. Just add a little dot of glue and that'll hold it in its position. So I have my 3 petals here that are slightly smaller that we're going to be adding first. And when we add these, I want you to think about adding them like kind of a triangular fashion, like I'm showing you here. I'm laying them out to kind of give you a visual example, but that's how you kind of want to place them around the center of the stem that we just created. So go ahead and start with 1, and you're just going to want to add glue to the very bottom, a little hot glue, and then place it right at the base underneath the stamen around the stem, and then give it a firm pinch with your fingers and hold it until dry. And then once that first one is dry, go ahead and add the second one on. And the main goal here is basically just to, when you add these first 3 petals on, just try and space them evenly. And if this is your first time doing it, then be patient with yourself because it does take a little practice to just learn the feel of the petals and getting them to get spaced evenly around the stem when you're working like this. So if you're brand new, just be patient. I didn't get it right the first time either, so just be patient with yourself. But try and place them as evenly as you can. But also remember that nature's not perfect, and so if something's not 100% perfect, that's okay, because sometimes a little bit of variation also makes things look more realistic. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this next part. I've done it both ways, but sometimes it could be helpful to add a little bit of corsage tape at this point just to reinforce that first layer of petals we just put together. So I like to add a little dot of glue to get the corsage tape to really grab on, and then I wrap it around the very base, and then I will continue with my petals here in a moment. And like I said, I've done it both ways, where I just continue with the petals without adding this layer of corsage tape. But if you feel like your first layer of petals didn't get like super good contact with the stem, then you may want to do this to make sure that they don't move around on you as you go to the next layer. So I have 4 here that I end up using, but if you feel that 5 comes together better for you, then that is totally fine too. And you want to work on placing them in between the first 3 that we just added on. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to add some glue to the bottom. You're going to place it at the very base of the flower, trying to position it in between 2 of the first petals that we started with. Now you're probably thinking, well, you had 3 petals and we're adding 4, so that doesn't really make sense, and you would be right. But what I have found is when I make these magnolias, I will try and place them directly in between the first 3 petals, but I usually notice that once I get down to that 3rd one and I have all 6 of them already on there, I notice there's usually one side of my flower that seems to have a little bit more space to it, even though I tried to make it as even as possible. And then that's where I will end up placing the 4th petal to kind of add a little bit of variation and a little extra fullness to the flower, wherever there happens to be that little extra bit of space that you will probably also end up with. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. I'm just positioning my petals here. And just try and hold each one till they're dry, at least mostly dry, so that they don't slide around on you too much. So here's kind of what I have now. And you can of course kind of pull your petals down a little bit to open the flower up a little. But you kind of notice that on one side of my magnolia flower, I have a little bit more space than on the other side. So like this one side over here is a little bit wider in space than where the other petals are touching on the other side right there. So that's where I'm going to add that fourth petal in, and that's going to kind of finish the look of the flower off a little bit more. So you can kind of do it this way, or if you feel that you want to add like 2 more petals in at this point, or even 3 more petals in, you can totally do that as well. I just ended up with 7 petals here. Things in nature often look really good in odd numbers, so that's why I went with a total of 7 petals in this magnolia flower, but you can do 8 or 9 if you feel you want to build the flower out a little bit more. You would just continue in the same fashion with gluing each petal on at a time. And I'm going to just rest my flower upside down there, and I'm going to finish the base off here with some corsage tape. This part I would say is pretty necessary because it just looks nice to have that base finished and not look as rough as it does right now, and adding that corsage tape just gives a nice finished, polished look to the bottom of the flower. So just add a little dotted glue and then wrap some corsage tape around the base and then all the way down. And if you don't have already pre-wrapped wire like I'm doing, you may want to continue to wrap the corsage tape all the way to the very tip of the stem, just so you have a really clean and nicely finished looking flower from top to bottom. So your magnolia is essentially finished now, and this is a pretty easy, beginner-friendly crepe paper flower tutorial. You can make a lot of them, and they're really pretty. And I'm going to show you a magnolia leaf tutorial later on in another video, but for now you know how to make these beautiful crepe paper flowers. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you would like to shop this template, you can find the link below this video on catchingcolorflies.com, and you can also find freebies on my blog, abbykirstencollections.com. I'll see you guys next time.